Okay, so the subject today is one we have different ways of splitting up the mitzvot. And mitzvot can be split according to time, right? We have mitzvot, for example, mitzvot shazman grama and mitzvot shazman lo grama. This means things that are particular to specific time. And this is also a directive in terms of what women are required. Mitzvot that are constant, then women have the same commitment as men, whereas those that are connected to specific time, women can do, but they are not required at the same level. We have many examples for this, right? Just to give one example, tzitzit, tefillin, and then you can ask questions. Wait, what about Shabbat? Shabbat is a specific time, and then in the Talmud they learn why it is connected to women as at the same as men. So we have different. So we have different mitzvot that are connected to times. For example, Pesach, right? Pesach, the mitzvah of matzah, is connected to a specific time. Then we have mitzvot that are particular, and these are connected to some of the mitzvot that we mentioned in terms of Eretz Israel, for example, that the mitzvot that are connected to agriculture in the land, right? We had a shiur about Trumot, Maasrot, Shemitah, about the different fruits of the land and giving to the poor from those fruits. So that's specifically connected to the land, for example. And then we have mitzvot that are connected to specific instances that the Torah will mention them in a specific instant. And then Chazal, our sages, have to teach us whether it's specific to that or whether this is a general rule which teaches us something that this mitzvah is not only particular to that instance, but rather to everything that it's teaching us a general rule for life. All of this introduction is an introduction to the mitzvah called Bal Tashchit, which means to not destroy. And we will see that it's particularly mentioned in the Torah in instance of war, in preparation for war, not to destroy fruit trees when you come in war to against the enemy. But then we see from it that we learn from that it's not only a particular case. The Talmud teaches us no, this is giving us a specific instance in which it's relevant, but this is true basically for every moment in life. So we have mitzvot, again, just to go back. So you say, okay, I have the mitzvah of tefillah, right? So I have a mitzvah to pray to God, but my mitzvah of, and then I have mitzvot like lighting the candle of Shabbat. I lit it once a week and I'm done. Whereas some mitzvot that you have are all of the time because they have to do with every single thing that you do. If we talk about waste, for example, that we can learn today, it's not that, oh, well, in the morning I didn't waste, right? But rather every time I open the tap to pour myself a cup of water, I ask myself, is this the amount that I need? Did I take too much? Am I pouring, am I wasting it? And because I took too much. And then, of course, we have the whole issue of sustainability and recycling, which fits into this as well. So, as the Nordics are leaders of environmentalism and sustainability, so I think you can feel good about yourselves that. And Israel, by the way, has made huge progress on recycling and has become a world leader in terms of water resources, but also in terms of the recycling system, both of the water and the rainwater, which of most of is recycled. Almost all of it is recycled and reused today, but also the system of recycling that has been implemented into the regular waste system, the garbage system, as well as the option to recycle yourself. Um, on the negative side, I would say that there isn't enough awareness of how this connects to the Torah. And if you ask me why, I don't know, because it's very basic, as we're going to see today. But the culture that you have within some of the religious world of using a lot of plastics, I would say it's not only cultural, it's also um, if you have if you're blessed with 9 kids around the house, and that means that you every bar mitzvah you're going to have 300 people just with close cousins, then it makes it a lot. Or Seder night and you have 80 people or 150 people, just family, then it becomes much more difficult um, to use regular dishware, etc. But maybe I'm just trying to give an excuse. Maybe it's not, because it doesn't fit with what we're going to learn today. So you hear a bit of my criticism within that things should change and that the rabbis should actually come forward, as some of them have, to say this is a basic in the Torah. You can't waste, and you're destroying the world. This doesn't fit with the mitzvah that we're going to see today. So let us see the sources, and then we can take it from there. Give me 1 second to find the window. Okay, here we go. Would anyone like to read out the first source from the Torah?
I can.
Thank you.
When in your war against a city, you have to besiege to a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees. Wielding the axe against them, you may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? Only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down from constructing siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced.
Okay, thank you. So there's a very strange passage here, which is it's a bit difficult to understand, because what is the meaning? Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you into the besieged city? And so it's seen as a question mark, um, as if saying, well, the pasuk is very clear, telling us you're not allowed to cut them down. But what is the connection to the human? So in other words, it can be seen in two ways. One is to say, well, you are now fighting against humans and you're willing to kill humans, but that doesn't mean that nature should pay the price, right? Or the other way to see it is, as you value human life, you should value nature as well. So it can be seen in either way according to the different commentaries, but most of them will put a question mark. Are trees of the field human to withdraw before you enter the siege? They have no way of getting away, basically. In other words, humans can take cover, but the trees are just standing there, and you can't take advantage of the tree just being unprotected and cutting it down. So it's interesting that the Torah tells us that this mitzvah is concerning fruit trees, but that those who have no fruit, you can cut down. In other words, what we see from here quite clearly is that the fruit trees have a specific purpose, which is to provide fruits. And because you have a specific need right now to besiege to this city, and you need wood in order to do so, you can't lose the understanding that these fruit trees are going to be standing there and giving us fruit for decades, if not hundreds of years. And therefore, you can't just cut them down because right now you're in a war situation. Whereas the regular trees, even though it's taken tens of years, like decades for them to grow, you can use it because that's their proper use. So the Torah is teaching us to differentiate between what is proper use and what is not. However, we can also see from this that the only reason you can cut down a tree is if it's needed for a specific use. But you can't just cut down tree because you like to. And this brings forth, as we're going to see that this is copied by and understood by the Talmud to be relevant for everything that we do in life, then it brings forth questions in general in terms of sustainability. Um, or just to give an example, is one allowed to hunt? Well, if you're hunting today, right, and you're not using um, you're just doing it for your fun. Is your fun considered a use just because I'm having fun? But then you can take that from the animal world and just ask in general, because the use is that the amount of water that we're using in a water park just to have fun, is that okay or is that not? And the level of a, but I would say that mostly the easiest and way to apply this is regarding food. Okay, how much food are you making? How much food is left over? And what are you doing with the leftover food? Is it very basic besides beyond the larger questions that I brought forward? And therefore, it will be a part of basic education, I would say, within Judaism today to say, um, be careful of how much food you take. Make sure you can't just throw away food. You have to reuse food if possible. And also having systems in which, for example, you have just think of every wedding, how much food is left over, but also every institution that is providing food for those, how much food is left over. And then in Israel, for example, you have many charity organizations that have a system in which they're collecting unused food, be it from the army, from hospitals, from institutions, from schools that have all of this left over that they haven't even set out. But of course, within that, just right, uh, not to you can also God forbid, poison. You can have food poisoning, etc. So you have to be careful of that. Um, okay, so the Torah continues and says, only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for constructing siege against the city that is waiting on you until it has been reduced. So going back to the wonderful shiur on environmentalism that Rav Yonatan Neri gave us, before we get into the halacha itself, there's a beautiful midrash, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, in which he talks about how much um, the voices that come that are basically, you can say, are heard right from one end of the world to the other. In other words, we're not aware, our ears are not listening to certain things that are there that are so powerful that they actually have a vibe in the world. And if we were listening carefully, we would hear them. So, what are the examples that Rabbi Eliezer says? Well, I can think from the Torah an example, the first murder, for example, in Genesis, in which it says that with Cain and Abel, and it says your brothers, uh, um, the sound of your brother's blood is screaming from the ground. That murder is something that is not personal. You can't, if you, God forbid, murder, if someone murders someone in their home, it's something that affects the entire world. Even if that person, even if it's unknown, it affects the world that we live in. So, Rabbi Eliezer says as follows: the voices of six objects of creation go from one end of the world to the other, and their voices are inaudible. When people cut down the wood of the tree which yields fruit, its cry goes from one end of the world to the other, and the voice is inaudible. When the serpent sloughs off its skin, its cry goes from one end of the world to the other, and its voice is not heard. When a woman is divorced from her husband, her voice goes forth from one end of the world to the other, but the voice is inaudible. When the infant comes forth from its mother's womb, when the soul departs from the body, the soul does not go out of the body until it beholds the Shekhinah, as it says, "For man shall not see me and live." So some of these are positive, most of them are negative. But the fact that we have, right, it's very interesting what you can think of why when you have a snake here that loses its skin, how does that fit in? But I think many of us can relate to the fact that, okay, well, if the moment that a baby comes into this world, that moment of birth, of creation, is something which has an effect on the entire world, that soul coming into this world, as well as a divorce, because a married couple are shalom, they're holding the Shekhinah in this world. And when a woman is divorced from her husband, the divorce is a type, God forbid, of the opposite, of the Shekhinah leaving. And therefore it leaves its imprint on the world. And maybe that's a good, I'm just thinking of that word. I know that today, I noticed when you buy a plane ticket, it tells you about the global imprint that you have by flying, right? So maybe this is a spiritual one in the same sense that when certain things that we do, we're not individuals living on an island. Even spiritually, we're connected. The whole world is connected. In that sense, these voices are heard throughout the world. So before we went into the halakha itself, I wanted to just bring forth this idea that cutting down a tree, you cut down a fruit tree against halakha, against what the Torah tells you. There's a cry there that destruction is heard throughout the world, and I think we can think of how many um, right how many other examples we can think of in which that type of destruction is leaving its a spiritual or carbon imprint on the world. But let's go from here into the Talmud. So the question that we brought forth is, first of all, is this specific to trees, or is it in general? And we're going to see that soon. But for the first discussion in the Talmud is, okay, what is it? What does it mean to have a fruit? Because as we know, fruit trees over time can lose their their ability to give fruit. They grow old, and in that sense, it would be a good thing, and it's a natural thing to renew the trees, which is something which is done throughout the agricultural world. So what happens if you have, and in that case, to use that wood for a fire, for example, to warm the home, would be the best thing to do. So the Talmud asks, and also it's very obvious that these questions in the Talmud, these are all people who lived the land, they lived in agriculture, including the scholars themselves, who are all farmers living on the land. So therefore, they can bring the questions were very applicable for them. So I would also say, as they were living in the Galilee during this period, after the Bar Kokhba period, Jews were no longer allowed to live in Judea. So the Talmud is being written. The scholars, the first scholars, are living in the Galilee, and then afterwards in the Babylonian Talmud, right, is in the area of Iraq. So these are also relevant. What trees are we talking about? So we're not going to be talking about cedar trees of Lebanon, for example. Rather, we're going to be, or fruit trees, no one's mentioning oranges here. Rather, the olive tree becomes the prime example. So, how much fruit must be on an olive tree so that one may not cut it down? So the answer is a quarter kav, which is a specific amount that is taken right in the harvest. And according to Rav, it is a full kav. So we're not going to get into some of the discussion because they're asking questions and comparing different sources to see what it is. But what we see here is that there's a direct discussion in the Talmud in Baba Kama and page 91b, in which they're discussing how much fruit should the fruit tree provide in order to come on to be considered one which is not allowed to be cut down. So then Maimonides, we have many more discussions, but as always, Maimonides um, sums up things very well for us. So it's also interesting because these halachot, because they're connected in the Torah to war, so we find them in Maimonides in the halachot that are related to war. And for anyone interested, you're welcome to look in Sfaria, look up Mishneh Torah of Maimonides, and just go through the laws of war, because there's many ethical questions that you might also have come into discussion in the last half a year, in terms of what is proportionate, what is not, what is allowed, halachot regarding hostages. What do we do in order to free hostages? What price do we pay for them? All of these things are not new, and it might be interesting for you just to learn either by yourself or with someone else from the shiur. I think it's a good thing. In the summer break, if you say, "Oh, let's learn one of the books that we came across during this year," and find the chavruta, someone a learning partner, and learn, and it could be interesting. We have all the books of philosophy that you've learned with us, but also this specifically Mishneh Torah, Kings and Wars, to go through the halachot there. So who can read it out for us, please? Someone else? Anyone?
I can.
Thank you, Florian.
This prohibition does not apply to trees alone. Rather, anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stops a spring, or ruins food with a destructive intent transgresses the command, do not destroy. However, he is not lashed. Instead, he receives stripes for rebellious conducts instituted by the sages.
Okay, so the last part is a bit is another discussion. In other words, there was different levels of punishment, but these things were taken very seriously. So we have two levels of being lashed. In other words, if someone is rebellious and does something in your face, as they say, right? It's not like you just do it, but you want to be rebellious. So the person would be lashed by the sages, and it was a very serious thing. We won't go into the different punishments that were given by the sages in those times, and many times the economical punishment, if possible, was given before physical. But here, the Rambam says quite clearly, right, that the prohibition does not apply to trees alone. Anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stops a spring. In other words, you're going in the middle of the forest, no one sees you, and you have this beautiful spring that is right running down in this waterfall, and you're just playing a game, and you just put some stones there to stop the spring from the environmental damage that you're doing there can be huge. Right? The spring suddenly takes another course, and the plants that were dependent on that water no longer get their source. This is against, you're not allowed to do it, according to the Torah. To ruin food with a destructive intent. I sometimes have this question when you have these, I don't know if you've ever seen, you can have a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah with fancy fruit design. And they take these fruits and they make beautiful platters and beautiful art. They can take a watermelon and make it into a baby cradle for a brit or something like that. I don't know if you've ever seen these things. But then the question is, okay, well, what about the food itself? Are you destroying a fruit now just to have something beautiful for a couple of minutes? Are you allowed even to do that? And if you're doing something like that, can it be done in a way in which that fruit can be used? Because you have to have awareness as you see, specifically towards food because it's so important, but just to, destroy a building, to tear a garment. And in this also the sense of recycling becomes very important. Taking your used garments to second-hand stores is a mitzvah. It's not just a nice thing to do. It's actually a mitzvah that you don't that you're giving someone else opportunity to use your garments instead of throwing them away. Um, so breaking utensils obviously doesn't mean when you slip and your coffee mug hits the floor. But if you're intentionally just destroying, and especially out of rage, is an example given by our rabbis. So it's not something new that someone can be so angry that he takes the nearest utensil and just shatters and smashes it. So again, this is beyond you. It's not your own action and how you're acting in that rage, which of course is not acceptable, but also that you're destroying something has a much bigger effect in the world that you live in beyond your own individual. So I would say in general, this mitzvah tells us that we live in a world that we affect, both spiritually and physically, and we have to be aware of that. Let's, if we can on the next halakha that we find in Maimonides is no longer connected to war, but actually to mourning. So, Florian, can you continue, please?
Yes. We teach a person that he should not recklessly destroy property and throw it to oblivion. It is better to give it to the poor than to throw it to maggots and worms. Whoever casts many articles on a deceased person violates the commandment against destroying property.
So Maimonides is referring to the culture that he lived in, and apparently, as a part of mourning, people would throw, just to show how sad that they were. They would throw different articles, even like articles meaning different properties or different things that they had, throw it on the deceased person to show that to show their grief. We also know that the Torah tells us that one out of grief is not allowed to destroy one's body, for example. I mean, this is something that the Canaanites and the nations did in the land, and it's so strong that the Torah tells us if you continue to do these type of things in the land. We just read this Shabbat, the parasha, in which it says if you act like the people in the land before you, the land itself will vomit you. Is the word that is used in the Torah, a very strong word. That the word that the land will vomit you from it as it vomited the previous nations before. So if we go back to this example of Cain and Abel, in which the land is crying out, so the actions that we take and that we do, especially in the Holy Land, have an effect on the land itself, not only on us. So much so that that if you take bad food, right, if you eat bad food, your body will vomit it because in order to survive. So in the same sense, if you act in unethical ways in the land will vomit you up. The land will get rid of you in order to be able to survive. I read this Shabbat, a fascinating halacha that is connecting both of these things, I think, and that apparently, right, the Talmud says, I was learning it in the Talmud teaches us that if you are leasing land from someone, and you lease land in order to plant, and you're planting flax, right? Flax, I don't know how you say it. You know what flax is? You can look at anyone. You can look it up. Pishtan in Hebrew. I don't know. Someone can look it up and help us. Maybe try.
It's the same as linseed.
Sorry?
It is the same as linseed.
Yes, it is. Okay, thank you. So apparently, the Talmud recognized the fact that the linseed takes out a lot of the energy of the ground when it grows. And therefore, it says that if you're going to be leasing the land for less than 7 years, you're not allowed to plant this flax, this linseed, because you'll be destroying the land and not allowing it to re-energize itself. In other words, the farmers throughout the world, I remember I visited a farm outside of Copenhagen, and the farmer was telling me how there's a cycle of the different grains. You don't do the same grain in the land forever because it just out the energy of the land. Rather, there's a cycle, right? One year you'll do wheat, and then the next one you'll do havre, you'll do the oat, etc., etc. So flax apparently is also very powerful. The reason that I found it fascinating that the amount of that the Talmud was aware of this, and that we have that. But going back to the spiritual element that we were talking about, that is mentioned in this parasha, if the land doesn't have the power to hold you, it's going to kick you out. It's going to vomit you up. And one of the examples that is given elsewhere in the Torah is when you if you mourn and that you actually destroy your body by doing so, making deep scratches or cutting deeply into your head. These are things that were done before, and this is actually the source of why we don't cut the corners of our head. That's the original source in the Torah, and the source of the peot as well, right? Which also have spiritual meaning, but that's the source in the Torah. So going back here to the Rambam, so mourning many times brought forth a lot of emotions, similar to anger, one can say. And when you're angry, you're breaking something. So people would put cast articles on a deceased person, and the Maimonides is saying this is not okay. First of all, I would say both at a level of faith, of acceptance. We say Baruch Dayan Emet when a person passes on, that we say blessed is the true judge who has decided that this person soul go onward. So we bless Hashem for that moment of death, even though it's very difficult. And secondly, also this anger and destructiveness is not a part. It cannot be a part of Judaism. So we saw that it had to do with war, with laws of war, but then it's also connected throughout. And we see that Maimonides brings it in mourning as well. But then we have regular examples. We have another example in the Talmud in Shabbat, in which Rav Zutra says, "He who covers an oil lamp or who covers a kerosene lamp for no purpose violates the prohibition, do not destroy, since by doing so the fuel burns more quickly." In other words, if you have an uncovered lamp, it will burn for more hours. If you have a less, right, if you're covering it for no good reason, not because you need to sleep and the light is bothering you, so the fuel is burning more, you're using more fuel, therefore you are violating the prohibition. Again, I wish, in a sense, I wish that there would be a directive within the halachic rabbinical world today to say you need to buy a car which uses less petrol, because that's example that you see here in the Shabbat. It's a direct, right? It's a directive directly from Shabbat saying you need to, if you're using a car, you should use as least petrol as possible. So if you have a hybrid car or an electric car, that would be following this directive. But I haven't, unfortunately, again, you hear my criticism or my frustration that it hasn't come across in that way. But you see that it's that in Shabbat, and this is just an example that Rav Zutra is giving us, but it's about everything in life. How much are you using something? How much are you saving? It doesn't have to do only with actions like mourning or like war, rather day to day, right? Turning off the lights, using a Shabbat. Now that you all have Shabbat timers, right? So to have it in the system, if you're building your home, right? For example, so you build with a timer. It saves a lot of light if you can use solar energy, if it's possible. Or even on a small step, if you have a garden outside and you have a light, replace it with a solar lamp that's not using that energy. So these are small examples just on that level of energy, of saving the energy as much as possible. So Sefer HaChinuch, as we've seen in a lot of these mitzvot, he always sums up the mitzvot very nicely for us. And this is mitzvah 529. So out of 613, this is 529 because it comes into Deuteronomy towards the end. So this is right, we're towards the end of the mitzvot according to the count of the Torah. So let's see what he says. Florian, you want to continue since you volunteered, or is that unfair of me to ask?
Sure. To not destroy fruit trees, that we have been prevented from chopping down trees when we besiege a city to distress the people of the city and to sadden their hearts. And about this is it stated, you may not destroy its tree, etc., and you shall not chop it down. And likewise not to do any damage, such as burning or ripping a garment or breaking a vessel for no reason, entered under this negative commandment. And in all of these matters, and in all that is similar to them, they, may their memory be blessed, would always say in the Gemara, Kiddushin 32a, but behold, he is transgressing on account of do not destroy. And nonetheless, we only administer lashes for one that cuts down a fruit tree, since it is explicit in scripture. But with other destructions, we only give him lashes of rebellion.
Okay, so this sums up, I think, basically what we have seen until now, right? That the Torah gives us a direct account regarding the trees, but then the Talmud will many times give an example and say, but this is Bal Tashchit. Bal Tashchit, this is not allowed because you are destroying. So this is something that we have to take with us basically in every act that we do in our lives. And again, there's more awareness to this in the different elements and how much we affect the world that we live in at many different levels, but especially at the level of fuel and petrol and gas and everything that we're using. We can actually use the resources that the world has been provided and do it at a very fast rate because of the norms that we have set for ourselves. So let us continue. The root of this commandment is well known. It is in order to teach our souls to love good and benefit and to cling to it. So here Sefer HaChinuch goes into the idea behind it in a very beautiful way. In order to educate ourselves to love good and benefit and to cling to it. In other words, if we are careful about Bal Tashchit, if we're careful about Bal Tashchit, then it teaches our soul to love good and benefit, because it creates an awareness of appreciation of everything that of the world that we live in. Whereas when we live in a world of waste in which you're just wasting and destroying, it will be the opposite. So Sefer HaChinuch continues, and through this, good clings to us, and we will distance ourselves from all bad and destructive things. In other words, it's not only the act itself of Bal Tashchit, or not destroying, that we're doing, but rather teaching and educating our soul to be connected to the positive. And this is the way of the pious and people of proper action. They love peace and are happy for the good of the creatures and bring them close to Torah. So, in other words, when we talked about recycling and secondhand stores and all of that, so the fact that kindness is something that is that educates our soul and the way that we act towards each other as well. So, um, and on the negative side, he says, right, those who do not, those who are regularly misusing or abusing the world that we live in and are destructive, they are, become less sensitive to what is around. They are, and they are distressed by all loss and destruction that they see. And they can, if they can prevent it, they will prevent any destruction with all of their strength. But not so the wicked, the brothers of the destructive spirits. They rejoice in the destruction of the world, and they destroy themselves in a way that a person measures so he is measured. In other words, this is about your personal education, but also this is how you nurture your soul. So it's not only what we saw here is that this mitzvah of Bal Tashchit is both physical because it connects to it's a question of sustainability in the world that we live in. Also spiritual in terms of the effect that destruction has on the world at the level that this tree's voice is heard throughout when you destroy it, but also at the spiritual level, personal level of oneself, because it nurtures one's soul in a positive way. So Sefer Chinuch continues here, but you're welcome to look into it. It's just a bit long, and our time is just up now. But this mitzvah, as we have seen it today, is something which is relevant, one of the most relevant mitzvot, one can say, because it's almost every way and every act that I do. If I sit down for breakfast, do I calculate the food and how much food I am using? What food am I buying? Is it possible to buy food which is less destructive? Organics, for example. We talked about the clothing that I wear, which is a direct example that Maimonides spoke about, as well as other examples that there's more awareness today, especially in the Nordic countries, I would say, are leading in this. What carbon imprint do I have on the world itself, etc., etc. So this was our mitzvah for today, and you can look much more into it because there's so many levels of it. And I wish us all, if there's any questions, you're welcome. Anyone have any comments or questions? You're very welcome.
Yeah, is there something about salt and soil, that not to pour salt on the soil during the war even? Or I just imagine? I think I read once that in one of the law of the war, that is not avoid to put salt in the soil to not destroy or something like that. Or I read it so...
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, definitely anything which is destructive, not only in the war, anything that is destructive, because the world, we talked about the example of the linseed, of the flax. We live in a world in which, especially now, there's more awareness of of the long-term sustainability that we can actually take responsibility for. So I would say any element of that in which we can make a choice about it. We can't always make choices. You buy something in the store, someone else has made many choices along the way before. You've actually had the coffee that you have. But if there is a choice to be made, for sure it would fit into this, be it about anything. Benny, please, bevakasha.
So, Moshe, David, if you have a sick tree that doesn't give fruit anymore, are you allowed to cut the tree down to plant a new one?
Definitely, that would be a part of this mitzvah, actually, because you will be reusing it and then using it for fire to warm the home, for example. So you shouldn't just throw out the wood. If you have a recycling plant, take it there. If you can yourself if you're living out on the land and cutting down the tree, then use it. And therefore, we saw in the Talmud where the Talmud is discussing how much fruit is actually left on the tree, because some trees can be weak and just have one or two fruits, and the better use would be, as you're suggesting, to use the land. The land also is using up its energy in the wrong way with this tree. So to replant will actually refreshen the land as well. And so that's a natural thing to do. Whereas to cut something down just because I feel that I want it is what the Torah is talking about. Thank you for the question. Florian?
Thank you.
I have a question, but I don't think it fully falls into what we're discussing, but it touches on it. I was talking about foraging recently, and it raised a few questions for me, in the sense that, first of all, is it allowed? And second of all, would it be considered stealing?
I couldn't hear you properly because I heard you cut off.
I can't hear you.
Can you repeat, Florian? Can you repeat it?
Yes, I can. So we were talking about foraging, sorry, picking, in nature and so on. So the question was, first of all, is it allowed? And is it considered destroying, even though like the fruits or whatever we're cutting is going to be used? And second of all, is it considered stealing? Or is there a gray zone?
I'm sorry, it's maybe my side. I couldn't hear the question, but so
I don't think it fully covers, like it's not fully on theme, so I'll text you about it. It's okay.
okay, but we can take it maybe or you can we can take it, or you can write it in the chat. But I'm sorry, I just technically it's not allowing me to hear. I don't know why. I hope everyone can you hear me okay in the shield? Yeah, everyone can hear me. Okay, that's good. So you can look more into this mitzvah. It's very important. I'll share the source sheet right now in the chat, so you can follow up the sources more if you wish. Both in Maimonides and Sefer Chinuch that we saw, and the laws of war that we spoke about, the midrash that we saw in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and the source itself in Dvarim in Deuteronomy. You'll all find that in the source sheet, and you're welcome to continue learning it with someone in the shiur, someone else. And I wish us all, B'ezrat Hashem, both tomorrow, as we mentioned, tonight, beginning tonight in Israel, Yom HaShoah, and the special importance this year. So take a moment or more of reflection for that, and connecting to the national sense that where people are today. And B'ezrat Hashem, may this week in Malmo also pass peacefully, despite all of the tensions. And Shavua Tov to everyone.
שבוע טוב, תודה רבה.
שבוע טוב, תודה רבה רב.